buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning to you. Happy Tuesday. Thanks for coming in and joining us for this beautiful day here as we get ready. September. How did we get to, wow. We're racing through 2025 in a big way. And I'm glad that you have decided to spend your morning with us here on the program. Thank you for coming in. We're gonna jump into the pool with both feet at this point. We're gonna deep dive. I know we try and ease you into it, but with no Monday today, we're gonna get right down into the nitty gritty with the weekly top three. Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets is going to be joining us here in a second. He's waiting in the wings right now with the big three topics for today, which include the permanent fund and the education committee and the race for governor. It's going to be an interesting, some interesting topics here this morning for you. In hour two of the program, we're going to do some recap. I've got some thoughts. I'm sure I'll have some thoughts by then. And we'll recap some of that stuff with my commentary. And then we will finish up the show, as always, with Chris Story, who will come in for our weekly, we like to call it a life coaching lesson. It's a little bit of positivity, and it's just kind of a way to hopefully spur you into a good day today as we go through. I hope your weekend was amazing. Your long weekend. It was it was exciting around here. Boy, the weather just could not make up his mind. Sunday it was just beautiful and bright and sunny, and then yesterday it was like torrential rain slapping the side of the house, not just the roof, but the sideways. It was kind of crazy, but we're loving it, and I hope that you guys had a restive and restorative weekend as we get ready to go through. But let's without further ado, let's jump into this with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and we'll see what he has to say to us this morning. Good morning, Brad. How are you this morning?
Michael, I'm doing great today. Did you enjoy your 1 day of fall that we get every year on Labor Day?
No, it was crazy, man. It's, the weather down here is so different than I think almost in anywhere else in the state. Like I said, it was a beautiful sunny summer day on Sunday. And then it got real weird yesterday. And Saturday was kind of a iffy, it was like half and half. But no, I'm loving it. And yeah, winter is, I hate to be that guy. Winter is here. It's right around the corner. We're staring down the barrel of it. So we're ready to go. All right. Well, let's get started. Brad, we've got a lot of things to crack in about, and we're going to start off with some hot stuff, a hot take from you on the permanent fund. And the permanent fund is, they're not doing everything. They cannot be all they can be. Let's put it that way. It's a big investment for very little return. Let's get down to it, shall we?
Well, Michael, this is another in our ongoing series of the performance of the Permanent Fund Corporation. And I think it's important to continue to differentiate between the Permanent Fund Corporation and the Permanent Fund. The Permanent Fund Corporation is the manager of the fund. The fund is the $80 billion plus or minus that we've got in the fund, but the management of that fund is by the Permanent Fund Corporation. In essence, it's the same as a Goldman Sachs or any of the other managers of funds. And we're talking about the performance. We've been talking about the performance of that corporation, the performance of the manager of the fund. And the reason I keep going back to this is, frankly, permanent fund returns, given the state of play that we're in right now, permanent fund returns on the permanent fund are more important than oil. The revenues that we're getting from the POMV draws for the general fund and for the PFD are greater than what we're getting from oil. The future in terms of growth of where the revenues are coming from is bigger for the permanent fund corporation, particularly given where oil taxes are, is bigger for returns from the permanent fund than for oil. So I keep coming back to this because it's a big deal from the standpoint of the state's fiscal situation and the state's revenue situation. The development this past week is that the permanent fund finally published what they call their management fees and expenses report. That's a quarterly report that they do that totals up the management fees and expenses that they've incurred during the quarter and shows how much it's costing us to have this active management that the Permanent Fund Corporation keeps claiming is important and valuable to Alaskans. How much it's costing us to do that? Now, I take that report and I use it in conjunction with a monthly report that the Permanent Fund Corporation does that shows its returns, the returns that the Permanent Fund Corporation has managed to achieve on the permanent fund, compared to some benchmarks that the Permanent Fund Corporation's adopted. One of those is particularly important when you're looking at the management fees. One of those benchmarks is what's called the passive index benchmark. And this is how the Permanent Fund Corporation defines or explains the passive index benchmark: a blend of passive indices reflective of a traditional portfolio consisting of public equities, fixed income, and real estate investments. Outperformance of the total fund versus the passive index benchmark is representative of the value added by APFC staff in generating higher returns through active asset allocation, through active management, active asset allocation, and portfolio management. Let me read that last sentence in reverse, because I want you to understand what I'm going to be talking about. Underperformance, they said the sentence goes outperformance of the total fund versus so the reverse of this is underperformance of the total fund versus this passive index benchmark is representative of the value destruction by APSE staff in generating lower returns through active asset allocation and portfolio management. So just the same way that you can look at the passive index benchmark, and if they exceed the passive index benchmark, then that is value added through the Permanent Fund Corporation's active management. If they fall lower than the passive index benchmark, then that's indicative of the fact that the active management that the Permanent Fund Corporation is engaged in is destroying value, is taking value away.
Right.
All right, so let's look at the numbers. And here is just a fascinating chart. What this chart does is year by year look at the permanent fund return that they achieve, the Permanent Fund Corporation's return that they achieved on assets versus the passive index benchmark that we just talked about. And then the difference between is the value added, what they themselves describe. If it's positive, it's the value added compared to the passive index benchmark, compared to just, letting it on autopilot. If it's negative, it's the value destruction from their active management compared to the passive index benchmark, just putting it on autopilot. And then next to that column, I've got the management incentive fees as a percent of assets that the Permanent Fund Corporation has spent on this active management. And then next to that is the dollar amount. And then you can look at the value added after fees and the return on fees. Here's the thing. The last 3 years, look at 2023, 2024, and 2025. The last 3 years have been negative. consecutive years have been negative by not a little bit. The permanent fund's return was short of the passive index benchmark in 2023 by 3.6%, was short in 2024 by 4%, and was short in 2025 by 3.84%. That is the comparison of their returns, the returns the PFC achieved compared to the passive index benchmark. And so that, by their own words, that is the value destruction, the negative value that was added compared to autopilot, the negative value that was created by the Permanent Fund Corporation's active management of the fund. How much did that active management cost us? That's what the new report that came out last week, the quarterly report, tells us. How much did that active management cost us? And you can see in the next column over, the columns that are entitled management incentive fees, first in terms of percent of assets and second in terms of dollars. How much did that active management cost us? And the total for the last 3 years, the total for the 3 years that were showing negative returns from the active management, the total is $2.4 billion. The Permanent Fund Corporation spent $2.4 billion over the past 3 years on its so-called active management to earn a negative return, negative against what they would have achieved had it been on autopilot. If you look at that $2.4 billion as an investment, that they spent it, they invested it in this active management to produce these returns.
Right.
If you look at that $2.4 billion as an investment, it's a negative return over the 3 years. It's a negative return of 492%, a negative 492%. I posted this up over the weekend, and there was a comment by Brian Fechter that I think is just captures this. Brian is former deputy director of the Department of Revenue in Alaska. He formerly was with the OMB in Alaska. He's now in Idaho because of Adam Crum, but that's another story. But here's Brian's take on this. There are two ends of the spectrum in terms of active management. There's Yale's endowment, which is superly active management. Their fees are something like 1.5% of the assets under management, but they've averaged 3% excess returns, 3% over the autopilot excess returns long term. Super well connected people, very highly compensated. He's talking about the Yale Endowment Fund, but able to get in on the ground floor of a lot of startup activities. Then there's Nevada and Idaho, who have one guy both of whom have one guy running the show, whose fees are less than $200,000, and just puts it in an index. In other words, puts it on autopilot at a low expense ratio and calls it good. The APFC, the Permanent Fund Corporation, seems to be in the middle in the worst way. They pay their people way too much. Their fees are way too high, and they're not able to generate any excess returns for what they're paying for what they're paying management companies. In fact, they're generating negative returns. That's what the red is. They are generating less than what's on autopilot. I think this is a huge problem that is more important than oil, than whatever we're doing with the oil companies, more important than oil, and is falling under the radar. So we've talked about it on the show before. We're going to keep talking about it until people really finally understand what's going on with the management by the Permanent Fund Corporation of the Permanent Fund.
And we have exactly opposite of what the former deputy director talked about as far as people who are connected. And we've got political appointees. We don't have professionals in a lot of those positions on the board and things like that. They had what's her face in there. Ellie Rubenstein was in there. She was connected, but she was seen to be doing it for her own thing. There's a lot of shenanigans going on, I guess, in the between the board and the management system.
I think this needs to be a campaign issue. I think gubernatorial candidates need to talk about what their vision is for the Permanent Fund Board. The governor appoints the Permanent Fund Board, appoints the members of the Permanent Fund Board. There is no legislative oversight. There is no requirement for legislative confirmation of the permanent fund board members. So it's entirely on the governor. These returns, these negative returns, are entirely on the Dunleavy administration. All of the members of the permanent fund board have been appointed or reappointed by the Dunleavy administration. And the board is the one that's driving the show. They have an executive director, but the board's the one that makes the allocation decisions that are producing these negative returns. So I think this needs to be an issue that is asked of gubernatorial candidates. What is your vision for the permanent fund board? And more importantly, what's your vision? I mean, to sort of test whether they really understand what's going on. What's your understanding of what's been going on with the Permanent Fund Corporation over the last several years?
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We continue here in just a moment. The weekly top 3 goes on. What are your thoughts on the Permanent Fund Board? Should we just set it and forget it and index it to the S&P 500? Or should we continue to pay several $1 billion over the course of years for a negative return? You can drop me an email, me at michaeldukeshow.com, me@michaeldukeshow.com. We gotta go. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Brad Keithley, our guest, number 2, dead ahead.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, joins us here this morning for the continuation of the weekly top 3. I mean, it's kind of when you look at the numbers and you threw those numbers up there, not quite as much as I expected, but when we look at them, still, when you're talking about a 489% negative return. And, you know, some people would say, well, yeah, but they got us this really nice positive return the year before. They were 900% over, you know, yada, yada, yada. And you're like, okay, but when it averages it out, wouldn't it just be better to not pay the fees and be on the S&P benchmark average? I mean, when you look at it, it's not that great.
Well, I would settle now in this situation for the passive index. Just put it on autopilot until we can get our arms around this. Just put it on autopilot. Put it on the passive index benchmark. The S&P is better, produces better returns, has been producing better returns than the passive index benchmark. But at least put it on the passive index benchmark. And yeah, people say, well, look at those big numbers. But when you average it over 3 years, let's take these numbers and average them over 3 years, it's a negative 492% return. When you average it over 5 years, even taking in 2022, which was a really bizarre year, that's the year that we came out of COVID, stock market plunged, all sorts of weird things went on. But even when you take into account that year, we're still at a negative 38% return on what they're spending on the active management. Something's gone wrong. I mean, these numbers weren't always like this. When you look back at 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, these numbers, I mean, you had down years in there, but they weren't triple digit down years. They weren't triple digit negative return down years. They had some good years, they had some bad years, but something in the last 3 years has gone wrong. Some would point out that sort of runs simultaneous with the change in the executive director that occurred a few years ago at the Dunleavy administration's urging. But something's going wrong. And this is so important. The permanent fund and the performance of the permanent fund and the earnings from the permanent fund are so important to the state's fiscal outlook that we need to identify the problem and we need to get the problem corrected.
Yeah, but again, trying to get I talked to a couple of candidates and they get kind of a glazed look in their eyes when I ask them about this. It's something that's, I mean, this is important. This is the future income of the state of Alaska right here. This is the lion's share of it. Of the PFC, the permanent fund draw is the largest share of revenue in the state right now, well beyond oil and gas or fish or timber or even the PFD take. I mean, it is the biggest chunk.
Yep. And it's something going wrong. I mean, we've identified, we've talked a lot about what's going wrong with SB 21, right? With what's going wrong with oil taxes, and something is going wrong with oil taxes as we've gotten into the current decade. And we need to look at that and correct it. But this is even more important than getting oil taxes corrected. This is more of the state's revenue generation than oil taxes. And if we have a continuation of this, I mean, the last 3 years have been consecutive down years. We have a continuation of this, then we're going to have some serious issues. I mean, some people get confused. It's not that we're losing money. It's that we're not earning the money we should out of the permanent fund. And it is losing money in this sense. If we put it on autopilot, this is telling us if we put it on autopilot, the Permanent Fund Corporation's own autopilot benchmark, if we put it on autopilot and got rid of the $2.4 billion that we've spent in management fees, we'd be doing better. And we need to be doing better. When you look at the state's fiscal outlook, we'll talk about this in a moment, but when you look at the state's fiscal outlook, we need to be doing better. We need to be clicking on all cylinders in terms of returns from the state's assets, including the permanent fund.
All right, 15 seconds. We're jumping back into it. Please like and share. There's only 5 likes because you hate me. That's what it is. I know it is. We're going to continue. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Public enema number 1. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number 1, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Welcome back. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense, Liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Brad Keithley, our guest. We continue on now, talking about the weekly top 3. Number 2 has to do, of course, with education. And Brad sprinkles some kudos out there. He says Senator Cronk is exactly right, which is not something I expected to hear. Brad, what are you talking about here?
Well, we had a mini segment on this during the break last week, and I want to give it a full segment because I think this is important. In the opening session of the K through 12 task force, the legislative K through 12 task force, that's charged with looking at funding for education funding for the state and coming up with a new approach or revised approach, revisions to the approach we take on education funding to get education funding back to where people think it should be, including any tests or assessments that ought to be used to assess whether we're going in the right direction on education. In the course of the opening meeting of the legislative K through 12 task force, Senator Cronk, Mike Cronk, said this. Cronk, a former school teacher, pointed to one. This is in an ADN article on the opening meeting. Cronk, a former school teacher, pointed to one looming factor not within the task force official purview: the state's fiscal plan. For years, most lawmakers have agreed that the state is not bringing in enough revenue to pay for all the services that Alaskans expect, including public schools. A fiscal plan working group convened in 2021 brought together a bipartisan group of lawmakers to discuss specific questions, much like the education task force seeks to do now. But most of the fiscal plan recommendations were never adopted. Cronk's point, and it's an absolutely correct one, was you can spend all day, you can spend all the time you want on a K through 12 funding plan. But if there's not an overarching fiscal plan within which the K through 12 funding works, you're just setting yourself up for failure. A lot of times in Alaska, and I wrote a column on this a few weeks ago in the Landmine, a lot of times in Alaska, we argue about trees. trees within the forest, and we argue about specific trees and whether that tree is growing fast enough, or whether that tree ought to be pruned, or whether that tree ought to be, replanted in some other place. We argue about the trees, and we lose sight of the overall forest of the fiscal plan. We lose sight of how that tree fits in the overall forest. And if moving that, and whether moving that tree, we lose sight of analyzing whether changing that tree or moving that tree destroys the forest, does things to the overall forest that the overall forest can't manage. And that's exactly what's going on here with the K through 12 funding task force. We're looking at the tree of K through 12 funding, and we're saying, oh, we need to change this, or we need to change that, or we need to evaluate this, or we need to evaluate that. There's going to be a lot of push for increasing the BSA. There's going to probably be a lot of push for increasing the factors that are attached to the BSA that result in the overall funding. There's probably going to be a lot of focus on K through 12 tree, and how and whether the K through 12 tree needs to be changed. But if you don't have an overall forest that you're looking at the same time as you look at the K through 12 tree, if you don't understand what impact that has on the overall forest, you're doomed to failure. And the problem with this task force, the problem with any debate about any given level of spending in the state, corrections, education, the university, the problem with focusing on any given segment of spending is if you don't fit that within the entire fiscal plan, you're making problems worse. We're running, and I'll talk about this a bit more in the next segment, but we're running a $1.7 billion annual current law deficit. When you look out over the next 10 years, an average of $1.7 billion annually in deficits. That's a huge number. That's like 25% of total spending. That's the deficit number we have. If you say, oh, K through 12 needs no more, without addressing the overarching fiscal plan, the overall forest, the fiscal forest that we're dealing with, if you just add more on top of that, we're just adding more on top of the deficit. We have to deal with the current law deficit. We have to deal with the fiscal plan first, get the forest defined, and then start dealing with the trees, and make sure that when you're dealing with the individual trees, it's in the context of the overall forest and fits in the overall forest. If we don't do that, if we keep focusing on these individual trees, oh, the university needs more money. Oh, K through 12 needs more money. Oh, corrections needs more money. Oh, public safety needs more money. If we keep dealing with these individual trees without dealing with the overall context, we're just going to keep going further and further and further down in the hole. So Senator Cronk has it right. Senator Cronk's point is, look, the K through 12, yes, K through 12 task force, good thing. Let's talk about a lot of stuff, but we need to get it in the context of an overall fiscal plan, or else this whole thing is doomed to failure, just like everything else in the forest is doomed to failure, because we're overtaking the amount of revenue that we have in the state.
You know, what was interesting in this whole conversation is that KTUU had the story about the task force and their meeting and everything else. And they mentioned that both Cronk and Ruffridge were focused heavily on how the state was going to be able to fund the education, given us our fiscal, situation. They quote Andy Story as saying, the situation is a funding conundrum, which is, I think, that's the understatement of the year. But then Loki Tobin says she anticipated learning more about funding schools from the Alaska Education and Early Development Department at the next meeting. Wait a second. You're the ones that fund what would you find out from the Department of Education, or what would Deed tell you about funding? You guys are the ones with the purse strings. You're the ones that have the money and control it. To me, it's just like, oh, okay, she obviously either doesn't get it or is intentionally trying to just delay and mislead. And I don't understand this at all.
Well, I think every meeting, I'm not a member of the task force, and so I could say, to spout whatever I want. But I think every meeting ought to start with, how in Alaska we start industry meetings with safety moments, right? some articulation of how to be safe out there in the oil patch, how to be safe out in the field. Good thing to start meetings with. I think we ought to start every session of the K through 12 task force with a fiscal policy moment, a fiscal overview moment. Look, we're running $1.7 billion deficits every year, on average, every year through the next 10-year period. We've got to find a way of fitting K through 12 in that $1.7 billion deficit. And we have to resolve the $1.7 billion deficit and we have to resolve that overall deficit before we can really resolve what we're going to do with K through 12. I think that is the starting point. That should be the starting point with every meeting, to understand the forest before you start digging in and trying to shuffle around the trees. Cronk's got it right. Hopefully Cronk and Ruffridge continue to make this point, even if the majority wants to ignore it or wants to, just keep focusing on this tree and sprinkle more money at this tree without understanding what it's doing to the forest. I think Cronk and Ruffridge have it right, and hopefully they will continue to repeating that point during every meeting.
Well, it's not going to matter because, again, the big thing about this whole education working group is that it's not even supposed to deliver its findings until year after next, right? Early 2027 is when they're going to deliver their. I mean, we're going to go through a whole cycle here, a whole budget cycle, and then some, and an election, trying to figure. This is my take. My hot take on this is that this is just another one of those delaying ploys where they can push it outside of Governor Dunleavy's purview because he'll be out of office, and they could push it past the election season and everything else and have to deliver this sometime next year after next. And so this is just more of a delaying tactic. It's theater. I mean, it feels like theater to me. I don't know about what you think, but
it is theater. But I think it's also designed, frankly, to try to shape the debate during next year's campaign cycle. I mean, so one of the consequences of not delivering the report until the end of next year is that they will have hearings during the entire year next year during the campaign year, and they will be able to call witnesses up, and they'll be able to spout statistics that they've cherry picked or hand picked to be able to prove their point, and that'll be repeated in the news cycles that's going on during the campaign year. So I think as much as maybe getting it past Dunleavy, setting up the time schedule so that it's past the end of the Dunleavy administration, I think it's as much to give it credibility or to give it a position during the entire campaign cycle, so as they can continue talking about this and try through those hearings to control what the campaigns are talking about during the cycle.
Don't you think that, again, as somebody just mentioned, isn't Loki Tobin, wasn't she an expert in educational I mean, shouldn't the whole, and between being a legislator who's in charge of the purse strings and being an educational expert, I mean, shouldn't she know what's going on with the budgetary issues? Again, this whole thing of, we got to wait for Deed to tell us what's going on with the funding. Wait a second.
It is theater in the sense that, Michael, it's designed to elevate this issue during the campaign cycle. It's designed to give them a platform. So the platform they have during the legislative session is confined to the spring, right? And it's going to be even more confined next year because it's an election year. People are going to want to, adjourn early and go out and campaign. So it's confined to that. Their attention span or their ability to pierce into the news media is confined to that legislative session. What this is doing is expanding them. It's essentially for this one issue, this one tree, it's expanding the legislative session over an entire 18-month period.
Right.
And so it gives them the ability, the forum, to continue to talk about this in a way that captures the news cycle over that entire period. It's not an individual legislator. So, the news cycle doesn't treat it as an individual legislator, it treats it as a committee, as a task force that, is I assume people will think, oh, it's fair and impartial. And they're going to do this over the entire campaign year. So I think or the entire election year. So I think it's much more it's much more than simply, yeah, Loki knew this stuff and shouldn't she know it already? It is a forum, creation
Right.
of a forum to continue to do this over the election year.
Well, like you said, I hadn't considered the fact that they'll be able to call hearings all throughout the election cycle and everything else, and they'll be able to bring it front and center, smoke and mirrors, but also with a purpose. All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Quick tease on number 3.
Number 3 is we're starting to get messages from the gubernatorial candidates. They're starting to write op-eds. We have 2 of them this past week, and we're going to talk about those.
All right, we're going to continue. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. We'll be back with more. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, our guest. I mean, I just look at this and you're right. It's theater, but with a purpose. I hadn't considered the fact that they would try and basically leverage this. I thought this was just a good way to kind of, everything that anything that somebody's going to bring up about education will be answered with, oh, well, we've got a task force working on that. We'll let you know what they decide. Right? Any new idea, any new thought, any new, oh, the task force is working on that, and we'll have recommendations in 2027 on that. Which that was, but now to utilize it too as a tool to be able to craft the narrative for the election season. Yeah, that's a whole nother kettle of fish right there. That's a whole nother level of theater for a purpose at this point, Brad.
Yep. And it's to keep the focus on this particular tree. It's to keep the focus on K through 12 funding. Forget the rest of it. Keep the focus on K through 12 funding. That's why I think it's particularly important for Cronk and Ruffridge to keep repeating during all these sessions, during all the committee meetings, to keep repeating the need to put this within the context of the overall forest, within the context of the overall fiscal plan. That if we don't have an overall fiscal plan, this is a waste of effort, because all we're doing is we're growing one tree bigger, or we're directing one tree another way without consideration of what it's doing to the overall forest. And we may be destroying the overall forest, for the sake of growing this one tree. So I think, yes, I think it's designed to go on during a campaign year for a reason. I think it's designed to keep the focus on this one issue during the campaign year. And I think it's critical that Cronk and Ruffridge continue to raise the overall forest, the fundability of the overall forest during the year to counterbalance what the other members are going to be trying to do to keep this narrow focus on the K through 12 tree.
Not to suborn your tree analogy, forest and tree analogy, but really it's rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? I mean, it's like, you're focused on this, but we're crashing into this iceberg. We should steer the ship, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole thing. Forest, trees, Titanic, whatever. But it's obviously coming, and nobody is talking. I mean, that's why it was so surprising when Cronk came out about this, because really nobody's really talking about what is going to be affecting us next year. I mean, they paid some lip service to it last session. But again, remember, Stedman let's not focus on that. We're going to focus on, well, wait a second. This is the biggest crisis we're facing, but don't focus on it. I mean, come on. It just seems like, again, we're getting the pats on the head and telling us it's all going to be okay.
That's how Alaska's gotten into this situation. I mean, we focused on the deck chairs. I'll continue that one. I like that one too. We focused on the deck chairs throughout this last decade. Oh, the deck chairs of we need oil and gas credits to spur additional production from the Cook Inlet. We need to address corrections to pick up on Will Stapp's comments a few weeks ago on the show. We need to address corrections by bringing all the prisoners home, even though it's going to cost us an arm and a leg. We need to do that. Everything has been on the deck chairs, focused on an individual deck chair, and we have not had in mind what it's doing to the overall ship as we've gone along. Cronk is raising the issue. I think Senator Cronk deserves credit for raising that issue, and I hope he stays at it, because if he doesn't, if he sort of collapses into where everybody else in the task force wants to go, which is focusing on this one deck chair, if he collapses into that, then it's just going to be a year of committee meetings and headlines about, oh my gosh, we need to do this on K through 12, or we need to do that on K through 12. With that, and we'll lose focus on the overall ship. So I think Senator Cronk is well positioned, well placed, and I hope he stays at it.
Well, and this is something that you and I have been harping on for over a year and a half now, specifically, is the forecasts of this deficit. And nobody, I mean, it's like everybody, put them in rocking chairs and they all nod. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. But then nothing happens. They don't talk about it. They don't engage it. Even candidates that, I would think would jump at this have kind of, avoided. I brought Shelley Hughes on board to talk about her candidacy. She was part of the fiscal policy working group. She was in the thick of it. And when I asked her about, putting that into motion, her answer was about the Sunset Committee, which is just a one piece. That's great. But that's her. I mean, we've got to acknowledge that we're in trouble. And nobody seems to want to acknowledge that. 20 seconds.
Well, this is going to be a great segue into the third segment. But Shelley Hughes, we need a candidate who steps up and makes fiscal policy the center of their campaign, because that is the overriding issue. We're not going to be able to do anything else because we've drained the SBR, the CBR, and we're about to drain the permanent fund dividend.
Here we go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like and share. Subscribe.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay, we're continuing now. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. The messaging. We're starting to get it from the candidates. And we were just talking about how nobody wants to talk about the 9 million pound elephant in the room, which is the upcoming deficit spending and a fiscal plan. Brad, you've had some chance to analyze some of this with these opinion pieces that are starting to come out. Give me your thoughts here.
Yeah, this is probably going to be another of those continuing segments of we had a gubernatorial candidate write an op-ed piece, and what's the reaction to that? We had two of them in the past week. Two of the candidates wrote op-eds in the ADN that's appearing in the other papers as we go along. And they both share a common theme. One of them was from Click Bishop, and the headline is, "I can get things done. Here's why I'm applying for the job of Alaska governor." And the other one was from Tom Begich, which was "Building Alaska's future by putting education first. Why I'm running for governor." Neither of these op-eds acknowledged that we're dealing with a fiscal outlook that is trash. Neither of these talked about the deficits we're facing. Neither of these talked about the fiscal constraints that the state's going to be operating under. Neither of these talked about even oil taxes. I mean, Begich had talked about oil taxes before, but it doesn't make it to this op-ed. Neither of these talk about the Permanent Fund Corporation and the absence of returns from the Permanent Fund Corporation, or the lack of full returns from the Permanent Fund Corporation. All of them, both of them, just talk about spending. Bishops talks about, I can get things done. I can do infrastructure. I can do big things. I've done it. I've known how to do it. I can accomplish it. Spending. Begich, building Alaska's future by putting education first. Why I'm running for governor. We need to spend more on education. Spending. Neither of these talk about where the revenues are supposed to come from. Neither of these talk about how you fit that what they want to spend on in the overall picture of our fiscal constraints, of our fiscal reality. It's just more and more what I can do, what I can spend on. And that's sort of where we come to in Alaska. We have candidates who are running on what I can spend on. Vote for me because I'll spend it on this. We don't have it. We don't have the revenue to support it, but I'll spend what we don't have on this. Vote for me and I'll spend it on that. I mean, Click Bishop especially is a little irritating. I can get things done. Here's why I'm applying for the job of Alaska governor, because I can get things done. Well, all he really did during his term in the Alaska Senate was cut the PFD, joined with Natasha von Imhoff and others to cut the PFD because they didn't have the courage to step up and have an overall fiscal plan that sort of put together an equitable way of raising revenue and limiting revenue and limiting spending to the revenue we had. It was just, I can get things done. What I did was I was part of the Senate that blew through the SBR, blew through the CBR, started cutting the PFD, and we still don't have anything to show for it. I mean, that's Click Bishop's record. Tom Begich's record is not much different. He spent less time in the Senate, but during his term, they blew through the end of the CBR and they can continue to cut the PFD. And yet both of these candidates are writing op-eds about, I can get things done because I will spend more in this particular area. Your comment about Shelley Hughes, I think is a perfect one. Shelley Hughes is perfectly positioned because of the role she played on the fiscal policy working group. Shelley Hughes is perfectly positioned to be the candidate of fiscal reality and the candidate of fiscal sanity. She can bring forward what the fiscal policy working group did, which was actually talking about a real balanced budget as opposed to these fake balanced budgets that the legislature has been claiming for the last several years. She's a candidate who can bring forward that experience and do it. We need a candidate that's going to do that. If we don't, we're just going to stumble our way through another election cycle and stumble our way into another governorship, another administration that's just going to keep digging the hole deeper, while they spend what we don't have on their favorite things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I feel like, there's a ton of candidates out there, and we've talked to a few of them. And there's been a lot of, and some of them have got a great talk, but not, we don't have any walk yet. And when I particularly put that question to Shelley Hughes when she was on the program about a overall fiscal plan, and she came back with the Sunset Commission, which again is great. It's a great idea, but it's just one part of a fiscal plan. And it's like nobody wants to engage in that deeper dialogue of, how do we fix the overall, and I know it's big and scary and it's probably people's eyes glaze over or whatever, but $1.7 billion average deficit for the next 10 years, with this next year potentially being $2.5 billion. I mean, somebody's got to be the adult in the room.
Yeah. And it's one of the consequences. We've talked about this a little bit on the show before. It's one of the consequences of ranked choice voting, I think, because everybody's trying to position themselves for the top four, right? And the numbers, given this many candidates, the numbers to get into the top four, I mean, you may have somebody, probably not, but you may have, you're going to have somebody in double digits in the teens who has a percent vote in the teens in the initial round that's going to make it to the top four. So everybody's trying to position themselves around what can I define as my core group to get myself in the teens, to get myself in the high teens, so that I make the final four, and then they'll tell themselves, then I'll be a real candidate once I make it to the top four. And part of what I think may be going on with Shelley, although this is speculation on my part, but part of what I think may be going on is Shelley sort of defined her top teens. Vote around, just talking about spending cuts and, about how we're going to control spending, as opposed to talking about a real fiscal plan. And she thinks she can get, her top teens a percentage out of just talking about that, and is concerned that if she talks about a full fiscal plan that would have revenues, that has some discussion of revenues, she might take away from her top teens. I think that's what's going on. I think that's why people are scared to get into it. But we don't need a scared governor. We need a governor who actually recognizes the reality that we're in, the fiscal reality we're in. We need a governor that recognizes, a candidate that recognizes that we're staring at a $1.7 billion deficit, and we need a full fiscal plan to deal with it. That is the core issue that will define Alaska over the next decade. And hopefully some candidate will step up and do that. I mean, you and I talked initially when Bernadette came out as a candidate. Oh, she's a strong conservative. She'll be a good candidate. But all she's doing is repeating Dunleavy 2018, which is, I'm going to cut my way out of this. And we saw where that went. We saw where that went, even with the Republican majority in the legislature. It didn't go anyplace. I mean, you get into a situation where everybody has their, sacred cow that they're going to defend. And by the time you add up 60 sacred cows, you're still in a deficit situation. We need a candidate who's going to talk about a full fiscal plan. Shelley's positioned to do it, but if she doesn't do it, then somebody else needs to step up and do it. Somebody needs to be, as you say, the adult in the room. Neither Click Bishop nor Tom Begich auditioned for being the adult in the room. They auditioned for being the special interest. I can continue spending, just vote for me and I'll spend it on this.
Right. Candidate. I'll fill your coffers or fill your pockets or do your special interest. And I've passed some of this information on the permanent fund stuff and all this other stuff to Shelley and to Bernadette's people and everything else. And I'm hoping that they will come up and start to tackle some of these things, because otherwise, like you said, it's just a repeat of the same things we've heard in the last 2 election cycles for governor. It's just the same kind of verbiage. There's a lot of talk, but how are you going to walk it when it gets there? And that's the big thing. 90 seconds, Brad. Final thoughts for today on this. What do we do?
Well, we need a governor who stands up and appoints a good permanent fund corporation board to get the permanent fund corporation back on track. We need somebody who talks about a full fiscal plan as opposed to just the trees inside the fiscal plan of education or corrections or whatever they want to talk about. And we need a governor. We need somebody writing their platform in the ADN that talks about a full fiscal plan, an equitable fiscal plan, a fair fiscal plan, and a complete fiscal plan that puts the state back on track. That's the core issue.
Well, I mean, we can only hope that there's people out there or candidates out there that are attracted to this idea. I know some of it is politics. You got to get through the primary, yada, 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 but you got to at least give us an inkling of it on the way through. All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Brad, thanks for coming on board. I appreciate you being part of it today.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to continue hour 2 dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. I mean, that's the thing, Brad. I've had some conversations with some people behind the scenes, and they're like, well, our candidate, they believe in, what you're talking about. They believe, but they've got to position themselves, and they don't want to let too many of their cards. They want to play the cards close to the vest right now, because otherwise other candidates might steal their good ideas or, I mean, at some point you've got to stick your head up above the crowd. You may take a tomato or two, but you've got to do it at some point. You can't, with a field of 10 people running for governor, at some point you've got to do something to differentiate yourself from the crowd, right?
Yeah, and basically what they're all saying, I mean, what Click and Begich both said is, I don't want to be the adult in the room. I want to be the panderer. I want to be the one who says, oh, I can do all this magically. Without the revenue to support it, without a fiscal plan to support it. I can be the builder, which is Click's claim, or I can be the education governor, which is Tom's claim, but without mentioning the revenue. And they're pandering to a particular base that, in their calculation gets them to the top teens and gets them to the Final Four, where they can pander some more, expand their pandering. We need somebody who from the get-go stands up and writes the op-ed that says, look, we need a fiscal plan. I'm going to be your fiscal governor. This is why we need a fiscal plan. We can't do any of this other stuff if we don't have a solid foundation on which to do it. If we don't see the iceberg coming and redirect redirect our way away from the iceberg. And then once we do that, we can do things inside the boundary of that fiscal plan. But until we do that, we're just whistling in the wind. We need somebody who writes that op-ed, some candidate that writes that op-ed.
Randy says, is the adult in the room the governor candidate who wants to institute an income tax, or one who is brave enough to list possible spending cuts? The answer is both. I mean, really, because again, with a $2 billion deficit, if you don't think taxes are on the table right now, you're not paying attention. With a $2 billion deficit, if you don't think that there's some form, because they could take all of the PFD, every bit of it, and there's still $1.5 billion in the hole, right? $1.4 billion in the hole. If you don't think it's going to happen, it's happening right now.
All we need, I mean, it's not like the plan isn't already written. All you need is to go back to the 2021 Legislative Policy Working Group, take that, fill in, turn it into bullet points or however you want to do it, and then talk about that. And you can say, look, this is what the legislature came up with when they took a group of them and set them off to one side and said, be adults in the room and come up with a policy. Both liberals and conservatives come up with a policy. This is what they came up with, and it's the correct one. And all you need to do as a candidate is to fill in the blanks and say, look, I'm going to build on that. And I'm going to come back to the legislature and say, look, this is what you guys came up with at one point. This is the right thing to do. Let's go do that. And it's not rocket science. You don't have to go create a whole bunch of stuff. You do have to worry about the Permanent Fund Corporation now because they've gone off track, but it's not rocket science to do all this stuff. And it's just, I mean, all you do is you take the Fiscal Policy Working Group document recommendations from 2021, write the op-ed around that, put that on a piece of paper and do the editing around that. And you've got a plan. You've got a plan that you can sell hard. But nobody's done that yet.
Well, nobody wants to be the candidate that says, oh, by the way, we're $1.7 billion in deficit every year for the next 10 years. Nobody wants to be that. The first person that steps up and is that candidate is the one that's going to stir some outrage, going to freak some people out, going to do all that, but they'll also be the ones that can help shape the narrative around it.
Yep.
And so somebody needs to be the adult and be the first one to take that large step. And it's a step of faith. There's no doubt about it. But you're going to actually have to. Somebody's going to have to do it.
Yeah. And you're going to have to think through, how do I get in the top teens in terms of my group by doing that? And it may be a challenge to do it, but that's what the state needs. I mean, we don't need more panderers. We don't need more people who's saying the solution is more education. That's all we need to do, more education, or more infrastructure in Click's case. That's all we need to do. Or just cut it away in Bernadette's case. That's not going to happen either. We need a candidate who understands that there's not a simple answer and that there's a complex answer, and simplify the complex answer, but give a total answer as opposed to these panderings that we're having, that we're starting to see come across now.
Right. No, it's madness, man. I don't know how many more times we can keep doing the same thing and keep, kicking the ball down the road, whether it's the education working group to try and delay, and then shape the narrative, whether it's just saying the same things of, we can totally cut our way to this 100%, because now we're so far into it. There's just, how do you cut $1.7 billion out of the budget without creating some kind of huge cratering hole somewhere? Somebody's got to address this. And yep. I don't know who it's going to be. I don't know who's going to grab the bull by the horns, but somebody's going to have to. And if not, we're going to be facing some serious issues in the next year or two.
Well, we know it's not going to be Click.
Yeah.
who's been part of the problem by spending down our savings and cutting into the PFD. We know it's not going to be Click. We know it's not going to be Tom, who just wants to spend more on K through 12 without worrying about the overall forest. We know it's not going to be Tom. So, by the process of elimination, we're finding out who it's not going to be. Maybe we'll get down and find somebody who goes the opposite direction, and we'll find they're the one.
I have some hopes, but Man, I don't know what's going to happen. All right, Brad Keithley, thank you so much, my friends. Good to talk with you. We'll see you next week.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we got to go. We're going to get out of here. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more. Hour 2 is right now.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Well, thank you for joining us on this beautiful Tuesday edition of the Michael Duke Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on your favorite station and translator. And, of course, we're streaming live on the internet as well out at michaeldukeshow.com. That's where you'll find links to the audio-only stream and, of course, links to Facebook and YouTube and Rumble, where we simulcast the radio show every morning on the internet. And, of course, we got folks out there. We got 55 so folks on the various platforms hanging out with us here this morning. And we'd love for you guys to come on board and join us out there as well on any of the platforms that you would like to share the chat room and enjoy the experience together. All right. We finished up with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. If you missed anything that Brad just went over, big 3 topics for today, you can go back and you can watch it on the replays on Facebook or YouTube or Rumble. Or you can subscribe to the podcast, which is available on Spotify there. If you want to go out there to Spotify, it's a great place to go, or any other podcasting app. You'll find us out there. But I'm going over just all the things that Brad was just talking about. And I'm going to say something that is just will probably be very controversial for the listeners to this program, because I'm going to, tell you that, we failed. And when I say we, I mean those of us who would consider ourselves to be fiscally conservative in this state. We failed because we were not able to convince enough people. As the government continued to grow, we were not able to convince enough people that we needed to cut the size and scope of government. And now we've reached a point to where the cuts only approach is not going to work. Okay. There's just not, it's not going to work. We're talking about, Brad was saying that on average, the 10-year forecast is now calling for $1.7 billion in deficit every year for the next 10 years. Let's just set that aside. Set the next 10 years aside for a minute. Let's talk about this next year. Okay? With the price of oil, the EIA and the IEA, their predictions, what's going to be happening with world oil prices and everything else. Smarter people than me who follow all this stuff and do it for a living have all said that oil prices are going to drop precipitously at the end of the year and into the beginning of next year. We're talking about oil being in maybe the mid to high 40s for Brent, which means that Alaska crude will be somewhere in the high 40s or maybe in the low 50s. We're currently projecting our budgets at $66 a barrel. So take another 20% off that, we're down into the $50 a barrel range, right? So next year, the deficit because in part, we're still running on this year's budget, which will run into next June. We're going to be underwater on this year's budget. There'll have to be some kind of supplemental that will have to go in, by some estimates, upwards of $250 million, plus the deficit for next year. We're talking about this next year alone having a deficit over $2 billion, potentially up to $2.3, $2.4 billion. Now, how do you cut $2 billion out of a $5.5 billion budget? How do you do that without creating a giant smoking crater in the middle of, you can't, wholesale cuts can be dangerous, and they can disrupt the whole system. You have to do this, piece by piece, right? You have to do this a little bit at a time. You have to do it, with a surgeon's precision. Otherwise, it can make a stinking mess of the economy, right? So those of us that continue to wander around, and those of us that continue to scream that we could just cut our way to success, I think you're ignoring two things. First of all, you're ignoring the fact that up until this point, heretofore, there has been no political will to cut any of this. We couldn't even cut out the unfilled positions this last year. Right? We had unfilled positions, money that was going to positions that had no people in them. Some of them for years. One of them is like 10 years the position had been unfilled, but every year they'd been funding that position and the money was being used by the department somewhere else, right? But we couldn't even cut that. And so what does that tell me? Well, it tells me unless something monumental happens, something momentous takes place, there is no way that you're going to convert a whole bunch of people to people who would in no way, shape, or form want to cut anything out of government to somebody who's going to want to make, any cuts to begin with, but there is no way you're going to find somebody who will justify cutting $2 billion. So that tells me one thing. First and foremost, it tells me that the PFD is essentially no more. The PFD is, I think, and I've gone on record and said it, that I think this will be probably the last PFD that we receive. Because even at $1,000, that's about $650 million in revenue. In cost, right? That's what it costs to pay the $1,000 dividend out. Even if they take all of the PFD, all the remaining PFD, it still leaves us with a $1.5 billion hole. So and I know we've been talking about this for 10 years on the show. 10 years we've been talking about, the taxes are, if we don't stop what we're doing, taxes are inevitable. And if taxes are inevitable, we need to start talking about what type of taxes make the most sense. Right? We need to have our skin in the game. Because otherwise they'll just slam something down our throat that we don't want to have to deal with. But here's where we're at. We're at the fork in the road here. The fork in the road is that no politician, especially a conservative, fiscal conservative, wants to talk about taxes because of the complete and total anti-tax sentiment that we see in the electorate, in the public. And this was made very plain by Ben Carpenter's race this last year on the Kenai. Ben had been nothing but a stalwart conservative. He had all the credentials. He'd done all the hard work. He'd done everything that he could possibly do. and he was beaten by a school union hack, right? A guy who made nice with all the Democrats and the progressives and everything else and did all this. And yet Ben was still defeated because that guy was smart enough to grab one piece that Ben talked about, which was the potential of a sales tax as part of an overall fiscal plan, and he was able to bludgeon Ben to death with it. Even though Ben was the only one trying to be the adult in the room. So I'm not surprised that no candidate has come out and said, in an overall fiscal plan, we would have, this A, B, C, D, E, and potentially taxes. Because that's the conundrum. We painted ourselves into a corner. There was a lot of Republicans out there, a lot of middle of the road Republicans who bought into hook, line, and sinker the whole dichotomy of, well, do you want a PFD or do you want taxes? And what have I been saying on this program for 10 years? If you don't stop, you're going to have both. They're going to take the PFD and they're going to tax you. That's the problem. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's all just going to go away. But I mean, we failed. We stayed too long on the cuts only approach because we just failed to acknowledge that there is just not enough political. We like our free stuff in this state too much. We love our free stuff. And I'm not just talking about the PFD. Okay? I'm not just talking about the permanent fund dividend. I'm talking about all the other stuff and the companies that got government contracts and all this, and the welfare state. And then on the other side, the corporate cronyism state and everything. We just love our free stuff. But the music is going to stop. And there's no more chairs in the room. That's where we're at right now. With a $2 billion deficit in this state for the upcoming year. And nobody is willing to say, we really ought to fix this whole funding fiscal problem. We need to do something. Nobody's doing that. And again, not surprising after they saw what happened to Ben Carpenter, again, in a conservative district, in a conservative area. He was defeated by a moderate. Even though Ben had the ultimate fiscal conservative track record, he got defeated by a moderate. Because people have become so they find the taxation discussion so abhorrent that it's like their brain just shuts off. Guys. Taxes are coming. They are coming. This year, I guarantee you, there'll be a discussion this year. We'll have taxes probably within the next 3 years in this state. That's what I believe right now. That's after the PFD is gone. And whether that's a income tax, whether that's a sales tax, whether that's a, God forbid, a property tax, whatever it is, we're gonna pay. So we should be having that conversation now to find the tax that generates the most revenue with the least impact on the economy, the private economy, the people. I mean, this is where we're at right now. And I'll be honest with you, the elected leaders we got right now, they're not helping. And most of the potentials, not looking great either. We're going to get into that here in a second. We're going to talk a little bit about this schooling education working group, this education group. And we're going to talk a little bit about these two op-eds that Brad was touching on from Click Bishop and from Tom Beggage, and we're gonna dissect that here just a little bit down. We'll continue here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty based, free thinking radio. We return with more in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay. Yeah, the Education Funding Task Force, says Kevin. Yeah, that's exactly it. Joel says, I don't trust our elections enough to believe Ben was truly defeated. I mean, I haven't heard anything about any chicanery on that, but I mean, again, this is part and parcel that whole distrust of the electoral system right now. David says, RE taxes, in regards to taxes, how many carve-outs will there be for special people? Education folks will want even more salary raises because the cost of living is high due to the state income tax. Oh, God. Oh, God. Frank asks, can enough money be raised by an income tax? Do we have a population that could do that? No, but I mean, we did talk about, Brad has talked about the flat tax and the amount of money that can be raised. The Fiscal Policy Working Group talked about a sales tax that was, I think it was 3%, and how much money it would have generated. There's, you know, it can raise enough, but it's going to require, as part of a overall plan, it's going to require some cuts. It's going to require some other revenues. There's going to be some changes. Let's see. I'm going back through here. What happens to the remainder of the permanent fund that is currently invested if we terminate the payments? Nothing. The money just accumulates in the earnings reserve. And they just keep drawing on it like they had. They just quit paying us. That's what happens. And Lisa kind of nails it here. Lisa, this is what I think is happening with a lot of these politicians, quite honestly, is ride the gravy train until it runs out instead of being part of the solution, not the problem. I think I think that there's several people in there who basically have just said, yep, they're going to ride the gravy train. And then when it all comes apart, they'll just jet out. Do you suppose there will be a government employee retirement funding task force next year? With this majority, Kevin, I would not be surprised. Don't give them any ideas, maybe. Don't give them any ideas. Yeah, they like free stuff too much, says Brian. I could see many Alaskans, says Miguel, moving to states that now no longer have property taxes at all. I know both Florida and Texas are talking about not having any property taxes. I know that's the direction they're going. And you know what? You want to see a growth in those states? Hell, if you could divest yourself of everything you own and take it down there and then own it and never have to pay property taxes again, wouldn't you at least consider it? Right? I mean, I would. Wouldn't you at least consider it? We'll see. All right. Where are we at here? We're about 50 seconds out. Yeah, it would have to be a flat. Kevin says there's not enough people in the top 20% for an income tax to make much of a difference. I think that's why, you were on the fiscal policy working group. Isn't that why they were talking about a sales tax, like a 2.5%, 3% sales tax, something like that? Because that had a much broader reach, Anyway, we're going to get back to it. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Please like and share. There's 60 of you in here and only 20 likes. I don't know why. I just don't know why. I don't care so much about the likes as I do about the shares. Share the program. And go out to my YouTube channel and subscribe there.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Okay. Well, let's get back to this here, shall we? We have got a lot to talk about here in the final couple segments of the show. We're going to be joined by Chris Story here in just a little bit, who's going to give us our weekly life coaching lesson. Yes, our weekly life coaching lesson. We're going to come on board with him, and he'll give us something. He'll give us something good. How about that? He'll give us something good to talk about. All right, let's continue on here and get started with these two opinion pieces. Well, actually, first, let's start off with the Education Task Force. Because this Education Task Force, as I said, and Brad kind of opened my eyes to a different perspective on this, because I saw it mostly as political theater, as a way to basically suborn the discussion on anything as far as education policy. And there's no reason why it can't be both things. Let's just put it that way. There's no reason why it can't be both things. And it is, they're going to basically say, well, we can't do any policy changes until after the Education Task Force has come together and made their recommendations, which again, I want to point out, won't be until early 2027. So that means that precludes any discussion on policies or anything else this next entire session. Because the argument will be, well, the Education Task Force is meeting on that, and we don't want to make any recommendation. Now, that's not going to stop them from funding. Now, it's interesting that the lawmakers, again, that they're calling this not just an education task force, but it is a task force on education funding. So you already know what it's about. It's already about the money. It's not necessarily about the quality of education. It's not about whether our kids are doing well. I mean, none of that, it's not the Education Quality Task Force. It's not even the Education Policy Task Force. It is the Education Funding Task Force. And again, kudos to Mike Cronk for, basically talking about, hey, what, how do we pay for it? How do we pay for this stuff? I mean, he's brought this up, even though ironically they said, well, it's not the purview, but it's, yeah, I know it's not the, wait, but you've got this, you're going to be talking about funding. I mean, he wants the task force, according to Mike Cronk, to create an ongoing, stable fiscal plan for funding schools. That is the important part. right? A stable fiscal, predictable, stable. These are the words that we're hearing here. But at least he's asking the question of how do we pay for it all, especially in light of, again, $1.5 to $2 billion funding gap that we're going to be seeing here in the next year. And then again, this comment from Loki Tobin. I don't even know what to say. Let me back up here. The meeting of this task force, which took place last week, focused largely on two items: goals of the committee and where public education currently stands in the state. Mike Cronk said on his goals for the task force, we want outcomes for our students. We want our scores to go up. We want to make sure that we're producing good students in school. And Cronk and Ruffridge both, the task force two minority leaders, focused heavily on how the state would be able to fund education, especially given the state's fiscal state, like the fiscal reality of where we're at. Andy Story, in what I will call the understatement of the century, said, it's a funding conundrum. It's a funding conundrum. We're going to be $1.5 billion to $2 billion in the hole. You want to increase education funding, and it's a funding conundrum. I mean, that's the understatement of the century. Now, Loki Tobin said she anticipated learning more about funding schools from the Alaska Education and Early Development Department at the next meeting, which isn't until October. The deed that she's going to learn more about funding schools from deed. I'm just struck by the fact that these are the people with the purse strings, and they're focusing on the funding mechanisms down in the school system instead of looking at the overall funding at the state level, decide how are we going to get to, we're looking at the micro instead of the macro, right? We're getting focused down into the minutia of, well, how do the schools fund themselves? How do they spend that funding? Granted, that's an important component down the road, but the biggest question now is, how do we pay for what we've got? And the fact that I thought really that this was more of just a political theater game to be able to kind of, hold up on any kind of policy decisions. But then Brad making that comment that, well, this really will go throughout the entire political season, this entire election season, and they'll be able to call, they'll be able to do town halls or be able to do meetings, or they'll be able to help craft the narrative around that education policy as we come into the election season. Oof. Just oof. And then we've got the two candidates that have put their name in the hat for governor, who are now have put their opinion pieces in, their pitches, why I'm running for governor. And Click Bishop, of course, gets in there and, he tells us all how he's going to build, he's going to do more. I won't waste time. I'm going to train Alaskans for Alaska jobs, which again, how are we going to pay for that? I know the finances. I served on the finance committee long enough to, yes, I would argue that that's you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem at this point. There's no mention of the fiscal uncertainty. There's no mention of the fiscal strain or the problem that we're going to be facing in the next couple of years. This is just all empty platitudes at this point. And then, but at least, I guess I could at least say Tom Begich is saying the quiet part out loud immediately. Building Alaska's future by putting education first. Why I'm running for governor. Well, you know who he's pandering to. The education lobby will love him. How much is we're spending $2 billion on education right now, right? How much is to spending even more? They both want to spend more. No word on how we're going to pay for everything else or how we're going to get to anything else. I mean, I cannot. At least Tom is bringing up the fact that the educational achievement scores are bad. He actually mentions that in the end of the article. Alaska cannot afford to fall further behind in education. We cannot accept being near the bottom nationally in reading and graduation rates. We cannot afford to lose talented teachers because we lack stability and vision. I mean, he at least mentions it in passing, the education scores and where we're going. But I mean, again, if his answer is simply and strictly to, if his answer is strictly just to spend more, again, how do we pay for it? Do you have anything in the wings? Do you have anything that's ready? I'm asking for a friend. Do you got anything that's ready there, Tom? How do we pay for any of that? Just questions. Thought I would throw that out there. Give me some questions. Anything. How do we pay for it? Okay. I guess here's my final thoughts as I wrap up before we get into it with Chris' story here. My final thoughts for today. As I said earlier, we've kind of failed. Now, I don't necessarily think, we've tried our hardest, but you know what? We keep focusing on the the cuts only approach when there's just no political will to do it. We failed to change tactics, which is the death knell of any, battle or engagement. If your tactics aren't working, you need to change your tactics. And we just failed to do that. And we've got a whole group of people who are supposedly our allies and supporters who don't want to talk about anything to do with taxation or anything else, even though at this point it's something that we're going to have to talk about, or it's just going to be thrust upon us. So we need to be brave. We need to be brave and start talking about a full fiscal plan. And that plan is going to include, yes, some cuts, but it's going to have to include some form of tax, some form of change. Some of these things are going to, because otherwise they're just going to ramrod it through. And you'd be like, where did that come from? It'll be well, I'll tell you where it came from. It came from exactly the same place that we've been telling you it's coming from the whole time, because you refuse to acknowledge it. Remember, government's what happens to you when you stop paying attention. If you think that if you just ignore it, it'll go away, well, the fiscal reality is here. The fiscal reality is here right now. We're about to the bill's about to come due. Anyway. All right. Well, we're up against the break. We're going to get to this. We got Chris Story coming on board here in a moment. We will continue with him. Hopefully he'll bring us a little bit of some lighter stuff, right? We will continue the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Chris Story will be joining us here in a moment. We'll be back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Chris Story is coming up. He just popped into the chat room. I was a little worried there. I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep or forgotten that it was Tuesday and not Monday. But, you know, I mean, we all make mistakes, right? It's all it is what it is. Let's go see what he has to say. Hello, Mr. Story, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Michael. I'm great. Well rested from a long weekend. How about you?
You know, I'm good. I'm good. It's been an interesting 10 days or so. So we're just getting things ready to go, and we really need some of your positivity today. Are you ready? No pressure or anything, but are you ready to deliver?
I was born ready. Absolutely. Ready to go.
I was born ready. I was on top of the world. I was born ready on top of the world with a golden spoon in my mouth or a golden microphone in my hand or whatever it is. Anyway, what's our topic for today, Chris?
Leaving a legacy of blank.
Okay. My mind. You could tell I'm a little negative today. My mind went someplace totally unrelated at that point. Leaving a legacy of blank. So it's all
blank. You get to fill in the blank.
Yeah. How was your weekend?
Great. It was wonderful. Yesterday was this weird mix, and those in Homer will understand. Those outside of Homer, I don't know what your weather was, but yesterday was an incredible mix of gorgeous sun and beautiful clouds, and then sudden downpour, and then a gorgeous evening again. It was a weird but wonderful day.
Yeah, it was weird for us. I mean, Sunday up here on the hill, it was just beautiful and sunshine and warm and gorgeous. And then yesterday morning was a little nice, and then all of a sudden it's just spitting rain sideways, like slapping. It's not hitting the roof; it's hitting the side of the house. It was kind of crazy, but I guess
wild ride.
Yeah, it is definitely like you said. You don't like the weather? Wait 15 minutes; it'll change. You'll get it all squared away, so it'll be good. All right, Chris. Well, I'm going to put you back into the green room here for a second while I finish up with the rest of the folks here and see what you guys have been talking about. Let's see. The education funding. Let's see. There we go. It's pouring rain again in Fairbanks. Yeah, you guys have had some real flooding issues over there, huh? Education Task Force has Loki Tobin in it. What she makes laws about kids is absolutely beyond why she makes laws about kids, I guess. Let's see. David said, I kind of remember an income tax study done a while ago. Conclusion, not enough dollars brought in, seemed like less than 200 million. I don't know if that was a progressive income tax, if it was a flat tax or whatever else, but I mean, you know, those are things that are going to have to be, I'm sure, are going to be discussed in the next 24 months for sure. Chris says the task force is a stacked deck. Yeah, I feel that. David says Click Bishop is partially responsible for our horrible overspending because he was co-chair of Senate Finance Committee for many years. Yeah. Melissa says cutting the Department of Corrections is a good spot to look for paying for some of it. Sure. I mean, we got to find some cuts everywhere. Oh, McCabe says in Senate Finance last year, Click Bishop took out my amendment to cut 6 positions from the Department of Labor. 6 positions. Took it out. Randy says, I want to talk about taxes. I don't want a state income tax. Okay. But that's not a plan, Randy. So what other kind of tax would you be interested in? Let's talk about the pros and cons of it. Because again, it's coming. They take all of the PFD. That's only $650 million, roughly. There's a $1.2 $7 to $2 billion deficit next year. So where does the rest of it come from? Just asking. Right? Okay, let's see. I'm not ready for snow, says Lisa. Yeah, me either. Yeah, I'm not either. All right. I guess we're all caught up. And we're 50 seconds out from rejoining the radio. So we're ready to get this thing put to bed and get things going on. Let me get this all squared away with Chris, and we'll do that. And we're ready to go. Chris is about to rejoin us here, and we're going to do this. Please like and share, follow, do all that stuff. Just do all the YouTube-y, you know the stuff and the things. By the way, thank you for some of you for subscribing to their YouTube channel. Those YouTube shorts are really doing well. Surprisingly, getting 500 to 1,200 views just in a couple days. Which is pretty good for a little old Alaska radio show. If you want to see them, go check them out.
The Michael Duke Show, proudly splitting the left versus right dichotomy. Yeah, I had to look that word up too. I don't think it means what he thinks it means. Here he is, though. That guy, Michael Dukes, the one with the show.
It actually does mean what I think it means. I don't think he knows what it means. All right, let's continue on here. Chris Story, the man from Homer, comes on board every week to talk with us about something positive, something, a little bit of a life coaching thing, a little bit of just food for thought. It's food for thought with Chris Story. And he joins us today to talk about leaving a legacy of blank. All right, Mr. Story, hit me with it. What do we got here?
Well, think about a murderer at a crime scene.
Okay.
And CSI's coming through, and there are fingerprints, very likely. There's DNA. You've left something behind. So whether you intentionally are leaving a mark or a legacy in this world, or you're intentionally making sure that people understand your legacy is X, Y, or Z, the reality is when everything's said and done and you're gone, they're going to figure out, they being the future generations or people, your peers after you're gone, they're going to really know what your legacy was. So you get to fill in the blank today. Leaving a legacy of blank means you get to fill in the blank by how you live and what you want us to focus on and everything. But the truth of it is, it could be a little bit like Armand Hammer. And I don't mean Armand Hammer, the brand. I mean Armand Hammer, the man, who paid for, he paid for his own legacy. He paid biographers to write favorable biographies of him. He paid for a legacy that truly wasn't his. The fact of the matter is, yes, he did. Armand Hammer was a billionaire, like one of the very first in this country. And he was an OG titan of industry. He reigned over Occidental Petroleum for more than 30 years, died at 92. And if you read his Wikipedia page, Armand Hammer was a philanthropist. He was a business leader and an entrepreneur. But the truth behind Armand's purchased legacy is that he was a tool of the Soviet Union. He actually helped the Soviet Union launder money. He didn't become a fabulous, wealthy businessman by the age of 30. No, he any money he'd earned by that age was through the misappropriation of artwork that was sold on behalf of the Soviet Union, who had absconded with it illegally, and then he sold it and kept a percentage, and the bulk of it went back to the Soviet Union. But to this moment in time, his appearance of a legacy is false, because the truth of it is he was really a cheat, a scoundrel, a liar, a manipulator. He abandoned more than one wife, more than one child, and was a terrible person, just an awful person in reality. But his legacy that's been paid for reads differently. But the truth remains. So just like at a murder at a crime scene, the truth and the real DNA of who you are is left behind. So I guess what I'm saying is we get to determine what legacy we wish to leave based on how we live. It isn't just a perception you can purchase. It isn't just a perception that you want people to think. There is a reality, and your legacy is being built either intentionally or unintentionally. But it is your choice, and we get to influence it. But rather than influence it with manipulating statistics or facts,
Right.
we're better off influencing it by good deeds and acts. What do we do? How do we behave? How do you treat other people? Steve Jobs said that your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think that's exactly true. What do people say about you when you are not present? Truthfully, that's your legacy. It'd be good to know what it is.
Yeah, we don't. Chris, can you leave the room for a minute? I need to talk about you just for a second.
You bet. No problem.
Yeah, no. Well, it's true. I mean, we all want to leave. You often you hear legacy around like presidents and politicians and leaders and things, but we all leave a legacy of some kind. And yeah, I would love to have a legacy that was that the world was a better place, with me in it, or that I helped more people or whatever. And I think that goes back to, but I don't know, can you ever really, he tried to buy his legacy. He tried to buy the good biographies, but the truth still comes out. So whatever you're doing, that eventually it's going to come to light, right?
Absolutely. And who do you wish to impact in your life? Like who's in your sphere of influence that you really care about what they say about you in the end? I'll never forget, one of the most poignant moments of my life was when my grandfather was passing, and I looked around the room, and we all knew he was just seconds from his last breath. And I just in that moment got incredibly present, and I looked around this very full hospital room where he was surrounded by close to 20 very, 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 very close family members who loved him deeply. And that is legacy. That is what matters. In the end, his business pursuits, his accolades in war, and his heroic behavior in World War II, all of that, yes, it's there. But what truly mattered, his legacy truly was in the hearts and minds, in the eyes of the people that I saw in that room, in that moment. And to me, that is legacy. You needn't be a radio star like Michael Dukes to have a big influence, because that big influence could be in a small number of people that could make all the difference. It could be 3, 5, 10, or 20 family members that you influence and that you have real sway in their lives, and that's significant. And so, again, in this Insta age and influencer age, we think in terms of what's our worldwide presence, what do people know about us online, our social fanfare, all of that is really irrelevant. I'll tell you, Michael, I got off Facebook, it's coming up on a year, it feels like ago, and I've not looked back once. And I think about those, I don't know, it's close to 3,000 quote unquote friends. And I think, my life has gone on, their life has gone on. They don't really, if they're not necessarily connected to me and my community and what I'm doing, they don't care about me at all. I'm gone from their life. It's like a dog putting their paws over their eyes. They don't see the world. The world doesn't exist, only what's in front of them. And so it's not to say that social media is all bad or all good. It's just truly your legacy's not living there. Your legacy's living in those two little children that only see you with your face in the phone. Those two little kids that are looking to you to play a board game or read a book to them, and maybe we're obsessed with some other legacy that we want to influence, or some other medium that's pulled us in. And or you just haven't spoken to a family member in a while, or you maybe you don't want to write a book, but you're thinking about, what would I want the next generation or 2 generations from now that may not ever know me? What do I want them to remember about me and how I saw the world? Because yes, we will tell your story to our children and grandchildren. And I still speak about my great grandmother, who I knew for a while in Florida when we'd go down to visit, and my grandmother and my children remember my grandparents, but a little less than I do, and their children don't know them, and their children's children won't know them at all, other than a couple of pictures on the wall. So these legacies we get to build throughout our daily life are incredibly important. But again, the number of people is very small. Your legacy is going to really be retained and remembered by a very small number of people. And those are the people we should be pouring more time and attention and love into. And you better not let a day go by where you don't tell them you love them and you're thinking about them and influence them.
The last couple, 3 minutes, Chris Story is our guest. You could find his stuff at ilovehomeralaska.com, by the way, for those of you who are following along at home. So we just make a decision, right? We make a decision on what we want our legacy to be, or do we just move forward and help others? What, do we make a conscious decision, or is it just a culmination of decisions?
Yes, to both. I think honestly, it's about being intentional. It's an intentionality of showing up and being present. In my book, I'm really proud of it. It's the least selling books of all 7, but it's the one I'm in a lot of ways most proud of. It's called Born to Live, Finding Purpose on the Road to Hope. The legacy that I wanted to leave in that small book, that if only my children and children's children ever read it, I am fine with it. It can be summed up in 3 lines. Look forward, learn from the past, but live in the present. Yes, you want to set goals. Yes, you want to think about what you did right or wrong in the past and how it's propelling you forward. But truthfully, the good life, the intentional legacy you're building is right here in the present moment, right now. It isn't tomorrow. It wasn't yesterday. It's right now. And if we stay focused and we're in the present, I think truthfully, intentionally focused on a quote unquote legacy is less about what will they say 5 generations from now and more about what am I doing in this present moment? Am I being intentional and am I making it matter? I have a radio coach, you probably know she is, Valerie Geller. She says that the secret to radio is never be boring, make it matter, and always tell the truth. And the reality is that's kind of a recipe for the good life. Never be boring, make it matter, make this moment matter, and always tell the truth. That's a legacy worth remembering.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Chris Story, the man from Homer, thank you so much for coming on board. As always, your new book is out, The Schoolyard Millionaire. Give us a 20-second synopsis of that real quick.
The wheel of life and wealth. And that's what's got me thinking about legacy. That's the truth of it. My little grandson, who was 8 at the time, said, "Papa, can I become a millionaire?" And this book is the answer to that question for him and his 3 siblings. But the truth of it is, it's for anybody who's interested in a legacy, The Schoolyard Millionaire.
All right. You can find it along with all of his other books, links to his audiobooks, podcast, and everything else at ilovehomeralaska.com. Chris Story, it's good to talk with you as always, my friend. Thanks for being part of it today. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week, okay?
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chris Story, the man from Homer. All right, folks, we are out of time for today. Tomorrow's Wednesday. I don't know who we're going to have on yet. We'll have somebody on. We'll pull something together. And this Friday, I think we're going to have Dr. John Lott on the program. So, should be some good stuff. All right. We will see you tomorrow. Be kind, love one another, live well. Okay. Well, my friends, that about does it for me today. Got lots of stuff going on, so we're going to continue on with this tomorrow. Don't forget to go out to our YouTube channel and subscribe to see all of our new YouTube short content, and make sure you share those, Make sure you share those with other people. All right, we got to go. We will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day, my friends.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.